Oh, is that better? I am just going to close it. Well, there we are. I searched for a good quote today that goes with the reading. Didn't really find one, but I found a quote that I really like. I read this and thought about it, and I thought, yep, it's true. It's by Elizabeth Kenny, who's an Australian nurse, is or was. He who angers you conquers you. How about that? He who angers you conquers you, or the one who angers you conquers you. Yeah, I got to really think about that. So when we get angry, usually the person we're angry at sparks something off inside ourselves, but that's another story. Today's reading is about touch. And, you know, I lived in the corporate world for a long time. And there's a lot of stuff that's ingrained about what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate between human beings. And touch is one of those things which is incredibly important, but it's also something that can be a problem. But let's see what Reverend Margaret's got to say about it first, and then I'll come back and give you my take. Okay, for The Magic of Touch, Emerson's Essays, page 190. Meantime, no other person is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is related. And Ernest Holmes, in a little bit of contrast in the Science of Mind textbook on page 367, says, I have listened to the silence, capital S, and in the deep places of life, also capitalized, he says, I have stood naked and receptive to thy songs, capitalized, and they have entered my soul. So let's see how that fits into today's reading. And Reverend Margaret says, some of the most wonderful things about being human are the many ways in which we have to communicate. I'm not thinking at this moment of our tech gadgets, as clever and as efficient as they may be. I'm thinking of our complicated, often inefficient ways of dealing with each other face to face. Of course, we have the medium of speech, often colorful, sometimes explosive, and at times completely bewildering. How often do we send messages that do not compute? And what about the times when we speak one thing but mean something else? And I would add, what about the times when we say something and other people completely misinterpret it? Not necessarily for the bad, but for the good as well, you know? I've actually heard Reverend Jesse say that when he's been given a talk on a Sunday and somebody's come up afterwards and said, wow, that's exactly right for me right now. And they have thought he'd said one thing, he had said something other, and they'd interpreted it as just what they needed to hear that day. So life is complicated. But then Reverend Margaret says, when things get complicated, there's always the means of touch. Not necessarily sexually based, but just the extension of a hand touching a shoulder or brushing a cheek. As beings inevitably connected in spirit, we can often miss the cues others may send, or perhaps we ourselves aren't sure of what we want to convey. The quiet touch, however, allows us to connect at basic living levels. It sends assurances that even though we may not have the right words at hand, we communicate our love through the divine circuits simply and without complication. A firm hand always sends an indication of support. An embrace lets another know that we can sense and understand that compassionate caring can be more important than words. Let us remember the multiple ways we can extend ourselves to others. Okay, so I wholeheartedly agree with what Reverend Margaret's saying. However, there are caveats. At least my experience says there's caveats, okay? But going back to the touch, we know that infants born prematurely and kept in a hospital, what do you call it? Not the emergency room. Oh, what is it? The Android mental blanks here now. Help me out. Anyway, in the what the heck do you call it? The care unit. Okay, we know that when they're touched by nurses or other people there, when they feel that touch, it's incredibly important to them. And we also know that touch really is a wonderful thing, that it does send a great message. Problem is in our society today that Western society mostly, I would say mostly American Western society, you got to be really careful when you touch somebody. You know, in the store, you can tap somebody on the shoulder and say, "Hey, did you see that? Oh, look, your shoelace is undone." If we have shoelaces, that is. And I still have some shoes with shoelaces. But we do have to be really important because it's taken on a whole exaggerated meaning in the workforce. And people have been sued and God knows what. So you do have to be careful. However, we do know from studies that touch is incredibly important. And how it's tolerated really does depend on the society. If you go to the Middle East, people stand really close to each other. You know, if you're talking to somebody of Middle Eastern descent, especially in the Middle East itself, they're going to get this far from your nose. And I've often seen Westerners, quote unquote, you know, backing away and the other person following them, because one person is really comfortable with that closeness and the other person is completely uncomfortable. And some societies practice touch more than others. You know, the Brits, from which I'm from, yeah, they practice touch, but they're not as, they don't go and kiss each other on the cheek as much as some other European countries do. But they do hug and they do shake hands. My mother was not one of those. She kind of was hands off, but that's another story. So the whole message here is be discreet. When somebody needs a helping hand, literally, you know, give them that helping hand. When you feel that touch is appropriate and it can be accepted, yes, do that just to comfort somebody. And usually in times of distress, I don't think anybody is going to be upset when you touch them because they know that you're trying to help them. And the other thing is that really Reverend Margaret doesn't mention here is not just touch, but our whole body language is incredibly important, and touch is just a part of that. So our body language is really incredibly important. And of course, we're all different. Some of us are more visual, some more kinesthetic, some more auditory. We're all a combination, but some prefer one thing over another. So my whole message is, you know, when you see someone that you feels needs some comfort, think about the most appropriate way to do that in that circumstance. And sometimes, and she actually mentions it here at the end, you know, she says, let us remember the multiple ways we can extend ourselves to others. And sometimes what people want isn't touch, it isn't advice, it's simply somebody to sit there and listen. You know, when I was a teenager, I was a member of the St. Vincent de Paul Society of the Catholic Church to which I belong. And we will go around, and oftentimes the only thing that people that we visited wanted was for somebody to listen to them, sit there and not give them advice, just listen and just acknowledge that you're listening, because active listening sends the message, I'm listening to you. And you can do that easily by saying, well, if I understand you correctly, this is what you tell me. Oh, yeah, I get it. You're telling me that when your daughter came 2 months ago and she brought this stuff for you, that it was really a big surprise. People just want to know they're being listened to, and sometimes that's all they need. So we're multi talented multi-channel people, and my message to everyone, including myself, is use what you think is the most appropriate communication tool in the circumstances. Let's have a look at her affirmation. I understand the deep meanings present in a warm smile and a loving touch. Absolutely. I engage all of myself daily. I engage all of my senses daily. So there you are. I'm a little bit early. Excuse me scratching my head, but I have to teach class tonight starting in an hour and a half, and I want to make sure everything's good and going for that. Please look out for two things tomorrow. My colleague, Reverend Lisa Ryan, who will be on about 9:15 in the morning. And also Daniel Mercadal, one of our practitioners, who will be doing her midweek meditation whenever her work schedule permits her to get on. Both of those are on Creative Life Spiritual Center's Facebook page, and you can find me on whichever social media outlet you found me on, and I'll be back on those pretty well every day. And if you still want to consider getting into Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life, text me 832-271-0717. It's not too late. It's not too late to join. So until next time, namaste.